session from. So this is the 10th session on the Microsoft Defender Zero to Hero webinar series. We started this journey sometime in Feb, and today here we are. I mean, there were scenarios wherein we couldn't just do it. We couldn't stick to our schedule because of certain personal commitments and stuff, but here we are today, right? So today we want to talk about getting started with Microsoft Defender for Identity Part 2. Now, this session does have a part 1. So if you didn't get a chance to, listen to part 1, I would kindly request you to go, view the part 1 session and then come back and view part 2, because only then a lot of the things that we are talking about would make sense to you. So with that, let's get started. So my name is Vignesh Ganeshan. I work as an enterprise architect, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Microsoft 365 as well as security, and I'm also a Microsoft MCT. With that, let me hand it over to my co-speaker, Samik. Samik, over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Vignesh, and myself, Samik. I'm just the security MVP in India and helping customer to implement security and get the best ROI of Microsoft products. So with that, over back to you, Vignesh.
All right, thank you. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, today we have a very simple agenda. I first want to do a quick recap and what is that we covered on the Defender for Identity Part 1. Then we'll be talking about the investigate and response story in Microsoft Defender for Identity. If you've been following our webinar series, we made it very clear that as long as it's a Microsoft XDR product, you get to do investigate, respond, and also there is remediation also, right? It's just not about detection. You also get to do the investigation, response, and remediation piece also. Now, there are some products within the Microsoft Defender XDR suite which has a plan 1 and plan 2, but the Microsoft Defender for Identity doesn't fall under that category, meaning it just has only one single plan. It doesn't have a plan 1 or plan 2. So with just as one single plan, you get the goodness of the, let's say, the detection, investigation, response, and also remediation. So here today, what we are planning to cover is more on the investigation and respond as well as the remediation piece. So that's what we want to target on the part 2. Of course, in part 1, we spoke more about, what is Defender for Identity? How do you get started with that? How do you start onboarding the domain controllers? How do you do the installation? What is a sensor settings? So pretty much the core nitty-gritties of Defender for Identity was covered in part 1. In today's session, we want to pivot and talk more around, how to make use of that setup, right? How to use Defender for Identity. It's more around seeing Defender for Identity in action. So we'll be talking about investigation and response. How do you investigate lateral movement parts using Microsoft Defender for Identity? Then we'll talk about alerts, then also remediation, and finally we'll open up for a Q&A. All right. So in terms of investigate and respond, right? Let me just quickly, I just want to share my screen quickly here so that I'll just make sense about what I just want to quickly show you what I'm talking about. So as I said, in the first session, we spoke about the, how do you get started, the deployment piece, how to plan and prepare, so on and so forth, right? So today we want to talk about investigate and respond as well as the other pieces here. So when you look at investigation and response in Microsoft Defender for Identity, there are certain assets that you can investigate and respond to using the Microsoft Defender for Identity. So a couple of things that you want to notice is how do you investigate a suspicious user? How do you investigate a suspicious group? And how do you investigate a suspicious device? These are the 3 things that you can basically do using a Microsoft Defender for Identity, right? So in terms of a suspicious user, I'm talking about a user who's created in the on-prem Active Directory, right? Of course, this user would be created there and then he would be synced to the cloud. But Defender for Identity makes much more sense from an on-prem Active Directory standpoint, because it's basically a tool which is meant to look into the on-prem identity, see what's happening on-prem, and also what's happening in the cloud also. That's why you call it as a hybrid, a tool which is meant to take care of all the hybrid identities. It's just not meant for the cloud, or it's just not meant only for the on-prem. It takes care of both the worlds. So these are some suspicious activities that it can take care from a user identity standpoint. For instance, was there some failed logins performed by a certain user account, right? So which resources did the user try to access? So whatever resource that user was trying to access, was it even right for him to access that, right? Was he supposed to even access that resource in the first place, right? So which device he was using? So all these kind of suspicious activities from a user identity standpoint is what I'm talking about. You can investigate that using your Defender for Identity, right? So similar way, you also have the investigation for suspicious groups. So when I'm talking about groups, I'm talking about this highly sensitive groups in your on-prem Active Directory, things such as your domain admins, your enterprise admins, right? So these are the default highly sensitive groups. Getting access to this group means you have the highest privilege there, right? Just imagine an attacker getting domain admin access. That's more than enough for him to go ahead and do enough damage to all the systems, to the complete network, right? So if at all you want to understand if any such suspicious addition was performed to a group, that can be performed using your Microsoft Defender for Identity. Uh, well, a lot of things that I'm talking about Samik will be doing a demo on that. As of now, I just want to sort of lay the land and tell you that, hey, this is what you can do from an investigate and response standpoint. And then in terms of suspicious devices, right? So when some suspicious activities were performed, right? From which device was this performed, right? Which device did the user sign into? Is this the device which a user normally signs into, or is this a different device which is trying to access our corporate resources? So pretty much you could be coming from any angle, right? You could be coming from a user's perspective, you could be added to a suspicious group, or you could be performing a malicious activity by using a device. So all these things can be looked upon using your Microsoft Defender for Identity. And so when we are showing you an alert, when you're showing you the demo, a lot of this thing would make sense to you. Now the next piece is, how do you understand and investigate lateral movement paths? Now, what is a lateral movement path? Now, as the name itself says, if you're somebody who has been on this space for quite some time, it's quite intuitive when I say lateral movement, because just imagine an attacker trying to get access to your account. Maybe you're just a normal user in your organization, right? You don't have any high privileges, right? You're not a domain admin, maybe you're not a global admin, but then he gets access to your account, and using that, he laterally moves and then he tries to get access to the high privilege accounts, right? Using a domain admin. So that's how normally attackers go after, because they first want to get into their network using a less sensitive account. And once they make their way into it, they tend to, slowly get inside and try to get access to all these high privilege accounts. It could be a domain admin or enterprise admin, or global admin, things of that sort. So in this image, you can see here that Vivian is an admin on this particular server, which Nick Carlson is logged into. So it's basically this user who has logged into. So, but this guy, he just came in and now he has become an administrator for that. So this is how attack. This is what you mean by lateral movements. But when we are showing the demo, it'll make much more sense to you. Then we also want to talk about the security alerts, right? So pretty much any suspicious activity that is performed in your environment would generate an alert. And all these alerts aggregated together is what would form an incident, right? That's how it works in the Microsoft Defender XDR world. So the Defender for Identity has its own set of alerts, right? Like say, for instance, Defender for Endpoint has its own set of alerts. Defender for Office 365 has its own set of alerts. Similar way, your Defender for Identity has its own set of alerts. And these alerts are categorized in these different categories. Well, these are not the only categories, but at a very high level, these are the categories which these alerts fall under. To just quickly talk about this, let me bring my screen here. So when I go to alerts, right? Understanding security alerts overview. I'll just be here. So these are the different categories, right? For instance, the recognize, sense, and discovery alerts, recognize, sense, and discovery alerts. Sorry about that. Persistence and privilege escalation alerts, credential access alerts, lateral movement alerts, and there are other alerts also. Now, just to understand what I mean by alert category, right? So when I click on this, these are all the different alerts which are tagged to that particular category, meaning these are all related to Defender for Identity. That's what it means, right? So you can see here account enumeration, reconnaissance, and then account enumeration. So it keeps going on, right? And then in terms of persistence and privilege escalation alerts, right? As the name itself says, these are all the different alerts which belong to this particular category. So suspected golden ticket usage, um, suspected, there's a lot of such things. So this has external ID, different external IDs are there. So the moment you're seeing these sort of alerts in your Defender for identity, I'm sorry, Microsoft Defender XDR, you need to understand that this belongs to Microsoft Defender for identity, and the category to that is its persistence and privilege escalation alerts, right? Similar way, you also have the credential access alerts, and these are all the different alerts which belong to this particular category. Well, this is more for you to go ahead and read. In today's session, we just want to make sure that you understand what you mean by investigate and respond, and what are the remediation actions that you can perform, right? And then a lot of the things that I'm showing you would be shown as a demo to you by Samik. Now going back to my presentation, right? So what is that we can do from a remediation standpoint? Because XDR is a tool which is just not only meant for detection, it can also do investigation and finally also remediation, and it can keep going on. So in terms of remediation actions, there are two main things that you can do, right? Let's say you found that a user's account has been compromised. You realize that something has gone wrong, right? So the remediation actions can be like disabling the user's account in Active Directory or resetting the user's password. So these are the two actions that can be performed so that you're quickly disabling access, right? The moment you disable the user's account, that's it. There is no way he can get back into the network. Or resetting the user's password is also something that you can be doing. So that's it from PowerPoint slash standpoint. Today we want to give more time towards the demo. So whatever I spoke about, now Samik will be demoing it to you. So Samik, over to you for the demo.
Thank you, Vignesh. And I will share my screen. And if you could confirm that the screen is visible and you can see the Defender screen.
It's coming up. Yeah.
All right. So we are talking about various demo scenarios for Defender for Identity, and quick bit of disclaimer before we start that this is a demo environment and all the demos are done in a controlled environment. This is only for learning purpose. Just make sure you learned enough thing. Don't try to look at the tool and act the tool and use that without any precaution. With that said, I'd get started. This is where you see the Defender portal, and considering our last session where we actually tried installing one of the sensors in one of the domain controllers, I would quickly go to settings. And once we reach to the settings, we are going to go to identities. And after we go to identities, basically you can see the domain was installed and it is healthy sensor. That means it started working. Now, on top of that, what we did, we also created a user in the local domain controller. If I may share my screen quickly and bring in the domain controller here, and you can see there's one user created, webinar demo user 2, right? That's created locally. And again, if I go back to the Defender for Identity environment, wherein it's already synchronized because AD sync is set up, and under sensitive, that's a normal user, but we thought it was a sensitive user and we added that user as a sensitive user here, as you can see here, right? Now, what's that we're going to do as a next thing? We are going to, and if I go to incidents and alerts, there are no incident creation for that user at least, right? I would go back to the DC, and what I would do is try to create some suspicious activity. For example, demo user 2, I would go to, let's say, enterprise admins, add that members, add the webinar. Okay, there's already user demo user 2. I added this, apply. Okay, then again, I'll go to domain admins. So this is, I'm trying to mimic what attacker ideally might do. So I'd also say again, domain and cancel it. I'll say check names, not this one. Maybe ideally I did the wrong thing. So I'll again try to do webinar and check names, webinar demo 2, say, okay, apply. Okay. Then quickly and go to maybe another cert publishers, which is really a sensitive group. So if you look at what I'm trying to do, a user normally created an Active Directory, which I did just a while ago, synchronized it so that it's synced, and then just trying to add that user randomly to some sort of highly sensitive groups. Obviously, the groups are already identified by MDI because those are not specified. So I would say okay, right? And then we would go and look at, try to refresh if we can see, the activity I did has generated some sort of wrong behavior, right? So we'll wait for the page to refresh, and we'll see if there's a new alert around that. Or it can also go with an existing alert, as you see. So we're going to give in a minute, but let me try to show you, what exactly happens. So this is one alert which we tried a while ago, right? As you can see, sensitive addition of user to sensitive groups. Then if I click on that, right? So all these details, like which account I used, and these are the three accounts wherein basically you can see also the three accounts. If I click on three accounts, as you can see. So because we have configured that all the alerts should be combined in one incident, because now you can also see webinar demo 2 is also part of the incident. That means this is also identified almost immediately by Defender for Identity, right? So what it says, as a user, this is the admin user, I'm logged into domain controller. This has been added to 3 security group which are sensitive in nature, right? So that's fundamentally the alert graph, as you see, which talks a little bit about what exactly happened. And right now, if we do more activity using those accounts, you might see also the lateral movement stuff and things like that, right? That's something, as you can see, real-time detection happens with Defender for Identity right away. And how that happened, just because we added the user, as a sensitive user. Obviously, the domain accounts, domain admins are by default there, but in a new account, you need to add them if you think they are kind of sensitive in nature, right? Now, let's imagine that if I go to three users, click on these details, and quickly try to scroll down a little bit, see what are the entities, and it can also say that the users, the groups it's been added to, and then three groups are added. So basically the fundamental details, right? So here it also has captured my current machine from which I took the action, and the DC, because DC is our DC wherein we are showing the demo in. And you can see all the users. So let's say if I click on the user, want to take some action, right? So let's say we're investigating. When you investigate, we're going to look at what is that we are going to see, and we're going to give it a moment to load. And what happens is, just to get more details, right, I will go to user page. So once I go to the user page, basically it loads all the details for that particular user with various details. So imagine that attack happened, MDI has actually picked it up, and then and it says it has one alert over one incident. That means it just created right now. And if I look at the timeline quickly, it says it will going to talk about that the activities happened. So as you see, that user created it just a while ago today, right? Now you can see, I mean, how fast it is. It was created like almost an hour ago, or maybe less than that. And within an hour, we added that user, into a sensitive group, or two, three sensitive groups. It just picked up, right? And while it picks up, it also tells you, like, what kind of activity or what kind of MITRE technique tactics used, right? If you hover on that, it's gonna see all the details over here. So that's a part of investigation from a user standpoint, right? That's where we're investigating. Now, if we try to get the remediation part of it, like what action to be taken, we can always say that confirm user compromise, right? That will add this user into enter ID protection as a compromised user. But if you really want to go more specific or more detailed or more more aggressive remediation steps, we can always suspend the user and then try to disable the user. Once this is disabled, we can enable it. We can say that the user required to sign in again to enter ID, force a password reset, and you can see things here. But the thing in action, for example, password reset, right? This also have some settings to do that with the configuration you have done in AD syncs on password write backs and things like that, right? So enter ID account setting, and you can see more of details around here. So to summarize the story here, right, we saw that the story is like there's one domain controller, a user is created, randomly, a normal user, and suddenly without the user logging in, one another user, you add that user to couple of sensitive groups, which is enterprise admins, domain admins, certificate publishers, and things like that. So, and the user also is risk as a, I don't know, tagged as a sensitive user. So Defender for Identity almost picked it up and showed us all the details. And we can see the alert graph, which shows you the storyline with the timeline as well. And then it also talks about what are the remediation actions we can take around that user, which is basically, nothing but making sure that we are not letting the user doing any stuff or doing any wrong stuff over there, right? And if I click on observed in organization, it's gonna list up all certain details around there. So we can also look at lateral movements, and hopefully we'll not get this as a lateral movement. The reason is the activity has only happened in DC and almost it is picked it up. Now, if we take action during this time, before that user, travels to some other system or some other users, we should be able to stop the lateral movement here itself. So now either we can catch it in lateral movement, or even if we are, Defender for Identity gives an option that you can stop it earlier, right? So this is one scenario, I would say, which we saw. Now we're gonna look at what are the other scenarios and what are the other possibilities available when we are, using Defender for Identity. So I'll go to system and again go back to settings. And once the setting page loads, we would go to identities, and after identities, you'd say, I would go to, let's scroll down, straight away come to extend exclusion by detection rule. That's one of the place you can look at. But just before that, that's gonna basically give you access to all the rules which Defender for Identity mostly runs to identify abnormal behaviors. But before that, you can also have a settings on adjusting the threshold. Now when you see adjusting threshold, right, and you see these are the patterns, right, like secure a reconnaissance of service principal on LDAP, suspect DKIM keyword, brute force on either Kerberos or NTLM, like suspected golden ticket issue, right? And then usage of the golden ticket. Now, if these things happen on your DC, right, the MDI engine is going to pick it up, and then each each category, right, or each alert will be like having thresholds, low, medium, and high. And fundamentally, low is like it's open for all. So even there is a slighter behavior change, right, it's gonna flag up low. And when there's also a setting recommended test mode, so I'll say turn it on, and you see what happens is if you turn it on, by default it's going to set everything to low, which I have already done it. That's how you see it. So you see it's kind of setting up all in low. I'm going to hit apply changes. So what happens is, we need to be very careful if you turn on the settings, because the moment you do that, let's say you have 20, 25, 30, whatever number of domain controllers in your environment, right? Defender for Identity engine is going to really go granular and observe any change in behavior. And then, you might get really an alert flood because you've set the threshold to low. That means even in the slightest thing is like, you're going to say, it triggers a detection automatically. Now, the moment learning mode is over, we're going to say turn it off, and let's say if we go for high here, right? So what's going to happen is with that high, it's going to consider various other facts. For example, as this is a behavioral engine, it takes time and it has a learning. So let's say if there is a golden ticket issuer and use, that's a common behavior it has seen in the past, it will use the learning period of it, it'll use the learning experience, and then you get lesser and lesser alerts. And the other way to present it is the alert you get now is really high fidelity. That means that has a lot of background references gone behind the scene to make sure the alert you were seeing, which is kind of really a high fidelity alert, right? So I'm going to skip not changing it to apply because it's a demo environment, right? The next settings is we as I mentioned earlier, we can go to exclusion by detection rule. Now, these are the alert names which are happening. Now, if you look at, there is really almost, as this number says, right, 68 of detection rule available, which basically runs. And none of these are not query based rules. These are machine learning model based rule, as you see, right? Suspicious Kerberos delegation attempt by a newly created computer. Now, there might be cases, right, that that some of the things happens in DC, and that's how the architecture or design is, or that's how the environment is. Now, what we can do is, if you need to whitelist a couple of things against a particular detection rule, we can always, for example, what it does, suspicious Kerberos delegation, right? It mostly, focuses on the device and the IP addresses from which it is happening. We can always add a device, we can always add IP addresses to make sure that these are excluded, right? These are excluded for the detection rule. So that means even now or after the learning period, when the detection rule runs, that's going to exclude that. So I think, just to give an example, we have one possibly, and yeah, as I see here. So suspicious communication over D in domain. So if you have AD for a setup and domain setup, I mean, time to time things get very complex, right? That what is the communication between that? You turn them off and just do certain things and things like that. Now, for example, this is what I have done. So just added 3 domains to make sure that if these communications are there, don't consider that as a suspicious activity, right? So that's kind of an example of what you can do. And so this kind of behavior happens. Defender for identity is going to exclude them. But having said that, this is not something you should do at day one. At least you should take enough time and let Defender settle down with all your domain controllers to understand and learn. When you have like at least 3 months or so, or maybe depending on your domain controller size and environment size, it might be lesser. But when you have an like understanding on MDI, understand your system, right, you can technically start whitelisting them whenever you're getting a lot false positive. But remember that when you do whitelisting, there should be additional steps added to the SOP, that this whitelisting has to be checked on a regular basis. Like, for example, these 3 domains, right, these might be meaningful to this environment as of today, but tomorrow they might not be. I might stop using, for example, this one, right? So I would come and update it. So, and that only happens if that's a part of the SOP of the SOC team, or the IT admin and stuff like that, right? Um, Now, if you look at, as I mentioned, right, there is a really lot of rule, and every rule can be having a whitelisting specific. Now, if we want to have a global exclusion, right, let's say we are building, we are bringing up a test DC, we are having, it's a test server, maybe it's a RODC, and we want to keep it like that's still being set up, right? And a lot of things, we're still, the hardening is going on. So we can also add user domain device IP addresses at a global level. And with that, what happens is none of the rule will consider them. So it is whitelisted. So for example, if I whitelist a user, right, what's going to happen is that whitelisting will be applied for all the rules wherever account is considered, right? Same thing goes for domains, devices, and IP addresses, right? That's the few thing, I would say, how you can basically look at things also in MDI. The next part is kind of honey token. As I say, right, if you're using a honey token accounts to set up trap for multiple users, you just, for example, how to set up a honey token tab. You just put the password openly and then let attacker crawl it. Now, to do that, in a controlled environment, you can use honey tokens and tag users. So these are kind of test users possibly for you, and then you give them away the password to attacker, or make them easily accessible to the attacker. So when someone creates it, right, someone try to access your environment, you're going to get alerted, and you understand that, okay, that's how the honey token is used, and it is accessible for users. It is possible for devices as well. But again, as I mentioned, this is not a day one thing. If you are managing Active Directory for, let's say, really couple of years, and you have completed the MDI installation, then you should go for this setup, just to make sure that's an additional layer of protection, known who's the attackers and things like that, right? And the next thing I'm gonna say is health issues. So now, obviously, there are multiple health issues possible for the sensor time to time. It can be a power settings, it can be a network settings, it can be something else. So whichever is the case, right? Either we have to accept the risk of a domain controller health issue, or you know um, try to mitigate it. But more importantly, we should get to know about the alert, right? And that's not an incident. Like, health issues are never going to get created as an incident. They are health issues. So to get them, to get a notification, you can add your email address and a DL over here, so that you can understand. For example, you have 10 DCs, one of them got a health issue due to that not being responding for 24 hours, 48 hours, or whatever is the reason, right? You will get alerted, because an health issue is never elevated or promoted as an incident. Incident is something when it is connected, healthy, and there is something happened over there. Now, as an example, I have just added the email address, right? You can add your own stuff. Now, what you can also do is, if any alert comes in which you just happened, like we just create an alert by doing some malicious activity, like for example, a newly account created, added to some sub high privilege user groups, right? To receive those kind of things, you can add an email alert here, and then you would receive whenever the email is available, or whenever the whenever the alert is coming in, right? Just to go by the other setting, which you've covered shortly in our previous session, but I would say to look at Algo Directory Service account, if you really want to have one credential configured, which will be used for your on-prem sensor connection, right? You can obviously go for it, right? And then you can also manage, either it can be local account, or you can also manually configure which account you want to use, right? And you can do it for a single level, and obviously the password comes in whenever you have an account type, right? So things like that. Then I say okay. Obviously, if you're using VPN, that's the enable radius accounting, what you should do about. So let's say if you're installing the area sensors and things like that, right? There are cases wherein you need to look at the licensing, you need to look at the sensor version, you need to look at the workspace ID. So basically the summary of the MDI instance, right? You can always look at this and go through all the details over here, right? So just to, for example, accept or create, know the workspace, right? This is the workspace which is useful whenever you're using MDI sensor. You can use this to query if the domain controller is accessible or it is accessible over proxy, right? So to get those kind of details. Coming to the sensitive piece, as I mentioned, we really can add sensitive users, devices, and groups to be to just look at a better lens and deeper lens on that. Honey token is something you can always have once you've set up the MDI sensors, and Exchange server, if you want to tag as an Exchange server, so that they become really treated as Exchange servers, and any activity, there is a difference in activity of Exchange server versus domain controller, and MDI treated them accordingly, right? Global excluded entities and exclusion by detection rule is, as I mentioned, those are basically exclusion or kind of whitelisting, and it happens over the time. And if you're using this feature, just make sure that you have an SOP, right? That it's not only the addition, time to time you also need to review them, that are the entities relevant still, if not, remove them, right? Next one is notification, the health issue notification. Any unhealthy things happen to the DC, for example, if I stop the DC now, right, for example, for 24 hours or 48 hours, that's going to be a health issue, because the MDI sensor cannot access that. Then alert notification, obviously the alert one, and then the syslog notification if you want to enable syslog around domain controllers, if you want to do that, right? And obviously we are using Defender XDR, so whatever alert or incident gets created in the left hand side, if I go to incidents, or maybe if I go to alerts, let me go to alerts for a moment, and we would see 4 alerts. And as you see, this is a new one, and it says persistence. And this basically have, you can see data source, a different of identity, 4 accounts, 2 devices, right? Because I have been using the same DC and same local machine to create all the alerts, or do the malicious kind of behavior, right? Alongside that, you can also look at other things. And as you know, Defender for XDR is also enabled with fusion capabilities now. That means if it sees something in from your identity protection, right? For example, this one, and also from Defender for identity, right? eventually it's going to create a high severity alert if the total pattern is behavior, right? Now coming back to the incident, that's where I would say, you can also look at certain things what you can do, right? So with that said, I think that was a quick demo of how you can generate or sample alerts, and if an attacker gets an access to a domain controller, right? There are other actions, like there are tools attackers use once they run the tool from any terminal or any DC, right? Those activities going to flag based on the behavior in MDI sensor. And the last piece of it, I would say, whenever we are installing the Defender for Identity installer, right? Few more data sets also come in. So for that, I'd go to hunting, advanced hunting, right? Uh, because as like any other Defender sensor, right, it's mostly capture the telemetry of the device too. So because we have because we have basically installed all the things in the DC, or the sensor in the DC, right? You can see identity directory events, identity logon events, and identity query event, because that's what the major events from a domain controller standpoint. Um, and all those things are going to get captured here, right? Let me see. I don't expect any outcome, but as you see, like identity info is something you can also get to see over here. So like this, I added this user as a kind of sensitive user, or if I need to show something else, I will try to show identity logon events. Let's say take one and run the query. So once I run the query, as you can see, logon successful report. I know I am using remote desktop, RDP, and then curve. So it means sensor does its job with a viable configuration, what you see here. But apart from that, if you want to do advanced hunting, right, you can also come to this console and utilize this table to do advanced hunting around the places. So with that said, I'll just give it back to Vignesh.
All right. Thanks for the detailed demo. So just one quick thing, if you could show that also. Can you
Yes.
just go to the alerts and show the category? That's something that I was talking about. If you can just go to the alerts and we
Yeah,
can show which categories they
correct. So there
belong.
we go. And detection source, sorry, categories, right? So
Yeah,
categories is basically, we would, we can map it to the MITRE techniques and tactics.
yeah. This was something which I was showing in my PPT also, like when these are the
So as I
different categories which these alerts fall under. Yeah.
Yes, and the good part is whenever you're using any Defender product, right, we don't need to worry about the category on MITRE. Um, Defender does it for us. So
Yeah.
because the behavior I did, right, that means, you know, somebody already have access to the domain controller, and that person
Mhm.
is able to create a user. That means they've already passed initial access and other stuff in the MITRE framework. And then you are into the persistence stage where you are doing it, right? So that's basically the category is what I would say.
Got
Yep.
got it. Okay, fair enough. All right, I think that's pretty much what we had in store for you today, folks. So, as I said in part one, we spoke about the initial planning, the installation, how to get started, how to do the setup, how to install the sensors and stuff. And today, as you could have probably seen, we have spent a lot of time talking about the investigate and response and also the remediation piece. So that's pretty much what we wanted to show in Defender for Identity. Our next session would be in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. That's the last product that we have left in the Microsoft Defender XDR series. Um, so we'll soon, sort of post the meeting invite and the other details for that in the meetup group. So please keep an eye for that. But as far as Defender for Identity is concerned, that's all we have in store for you today. So please go ahead and let me just quickly share my screen here to show you the content that we were referring to prepare for this webinar. Right, and this is something which I want you all to go through. So basically, this was the entire thing that we were referring to. So as I said in the first two sessions, it was more around the deployment piece and how to manage and stuff. So today it was more around the investigate and respond, how to do that, the remediation piece. We also spoke about alerts. So please spend some time going through all these documents, try to create the environment, try to onboard your domain controllers, try to play around and see how you can go from there. So that's all we have. Thanks a lot for being wonderful audiences. So if at all you have any questions, now would be the good time to bring it up. Thank you.